The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time has countless cancelled and unused content. We've made over a dozen videos on the topic showing interviews and facts on screen to confirm everything, and to this day, we are still coming across more unused concepts and interesting facts about the game. You can find a link in the description for our videos on Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, and Breath of the Wild. Today we're going to focus on Ocarina of Time with some stuff that you may not have known about. Let's begin. Ocarina of Time originally only featured adult Link. When Ocarina of Time was just a concept known as Zelda 64, it went through many changes. The reason for most of them is that Nintendo had no idea what the N64 console was capable of, what the disc expansion was capable of, or how powerful the console was. So when development first began, Nintendo only had adult Link in mind. Zelda 64 had Link begin as adult Link. Getting closer to its original release date in 1997, during the final stages of Zelda 64, before it would become delayed and renamed Ocarina of Time, Nintendo updated their official website with a synopsis of the game and screenshots. The most interesting part of Nintendo's own description of the game is that adult Link would wake up on his birthday by Navi, where he would be given a fairy as everyone else is during their coming-of-age party. Yes, that's right, the Kokiri were not given fairies as kids. From Nintendo's own description, they were given fairies when they came of age. This had screenshots of adult Link in Kokiri Forest with around 3 hearts and inside the Deku Tree. We know in the original game, Link is given a fairy to help him on his quest, and because the Deku Tree was cursed, Link would have otherwise never even been given a fairy. This was obviously completely changed during its delay. Another version had past, present, and future. Another feature mentioned in the Zelda 64 version was that they originally had plans for Link to travel to the past, present, and future. Not just the present and the future. Presumably the present would have been adult Link, the past as child Link, and the future as even older Link. Perhaps this would have given time for Zora's Domain to thaw out? Who knows? It's interesting to think about though. Ocarina of Time had 2 expansions, not 1. Most fans know about Ura Zelda, the cancelled expansion for Ocarina of Time on the N64 DD. What they don't know is that the game originally had 2 expansions. It goes like this. It began as Zelda 64 for only the disk drive, everything in a single complete disc for the 64 disk drive expansion, similar to how the original Zelda released on the Famicom disk system. When the attachment was seen as a failure, they decided to move the main chunk of the game to a cartridge format with the extra ideas saved for the disk drive expansion. The game had to be incredibly edited and cut down to go from the huge file size the disk drive allowed to a small cartridge. Then they began coming up with ways to add everything back with the Ura expansion, though it would still be different from the original concept as the standalone game on the cartridge had to be its own complete story. While coming up with ideas and concepts for the Ura expansion, Nintendo decided to split it into 2 completely different expansions. The original idea for Ura Zelda expansion became Ura Zelda and Zelda Gaiden, the first expansion keeping the Ura name. Now when you hear people talk about all of the extra stuff that would have been included in the expansion, they are mostly talking about the complete original Ura, not the Master Quest version that Nintendo promoted with the Wind Waker pre-order. Ideas and concepts from the second version of Ura did sort of become Master Quest, though it wasn't the original idea for Ura. The ideas and concepts for the second expansion, Zelda Gaiden, would go on to become the foundation for Majora's Mask. Yes, it is a little bit complicated, but you can find interviews and more where Miyamoto and Aonuma go into more detail. The one we are referencing comes directly from their interviews with Nintendo Power.
Navi was originally going to have an even larger role in the game, a far cry from what she began as, a simple triangle. Then, the creators wanted her to be pretty. They couldn't create a tiny human-like figure, so they did what they could, and gave us the more traditional round fairy. This isn't the only Navi concept left out of the final game. Apparently, an odd love triangle would have existed between Navi, Link, and Zelda, with Navi and Zelda being jealous of each other. Maybe this concept was switched over to just have the Great Fairies be a bit more flirtatious with Link. It's a bit obvious the quote, pretty fairy idea was carried over to them. Either way, I think this is one of the more bizarre ideas from Nintendo for a Zelda game.
The original concept had Ocarina of Time taking place entirely in the castle. This is a decently common known fact and one that I imagine we are all grateful for being scrapped. Just as Super Mario 64 took place mostly inside a castle and being able to jump into paintings to visit other levels or worlds, the original Zelda 64 was to do this as well. Apparently, this is also where the idea for Ganondorf running in and out of paintings came from, an idea reused in A Link Between Worlds. Supposedly, the first tech demo we see of Zelda 64 was created during this idea version of the game. You can also see part of the concept brought back by having the castle be the last dungeon and incorporate elements from all of the other main dungeons. This was all due once again to Miyamoto and others not knowing how powerful the N64 was and what it was actually capable of. Once they learned they would not be limited to sticking to a castle, we ended up getting the Hyrule we all know and love.
Crying Po. This is a small fun fact that a lot of people missed. On a recent playthrough of Ocarina of Time, by our Hylian Gamescast co-host, Daniel, found that the last Po in the Forest Temple can be seen crying before confronting her, possibly because of Link killing her sisters. It makes you wonder who the real bad guy is here. This is something that took us over 20 years to realize, so if you have any crazy facts of your own, post them in the comments below.
Jump button. Zelda 2 was the first Zelda game to include a jump button. Breath of the Wild was the first 3D Zelda game to include one, if you don't count side jumps, jump attacks, and backflips. Just as Ocarina of Time was at one point going to be a remake of sorts of Zelda 2, it also included a dedicated jump button. Nintendo decided against it. Some think it was to help differentiate Zelda 64 and Mario 64, as it's thought at this time in development, Zelda 64 could have still been in its castle phase with no real overworld. Having both games take place entirely inside a castle and warping to other areas may have been too similar and repetitive. In the end, it ended up being easier just having an auto jump.
Epona and Mario, not Zelda. Another similarity that could have happened, Nintendo wanted to add Epona to Super Mario 64. They couldn't figure out a good way to do it. Mario's proportions wouldn't really work with a horse, which is also a reason they would give on not having Wind Waker Link ride a horse. Instead of dropping the idea altogether, Koizumi was finally able to implement the idea in Ocarina of Time. He said this on coming up with her name: Epona is the goddess of horses and fertility in Celtic mythology, so I used that. When you name something, it increases your affection for it, so I worked hard to make her a good horse. Let us know in the comments real quick, how different do you think Zelda or Mario would have been if the horse idea was in Mario, not Zelda? Or do you think they would have added the horse to both?
A third Hero of Time game was cancelled for Twilight Princess. Not so much to do with Ocarina of Time as much as a potential sequel. Most of us know that Twilight Princess began as Wind Waker 2, but what people don't mention nearly as often is that there was a moment after Wind Waker 2's cancellation, and it was once again going to be delayed so they could work on it as Twilight Princess. Nintendo wanted to make a sequel to Majora's Mask. It would have been an official third Hero of Time game, something fans are still asking for to this day. A lot of elements ended up in Twilight Princess, with other unused content going on to be used in Skyward Sword and others. Maybe this is why Twilight Princess has so many similarities to Ocarina of Time. Even the unused Sheik model went on to be used in Smash Brothers. Hey everyone, it's me again, 𝐓𝐷𝐬𝐴. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this video. And you know what? If you're a fan of videos like this, you should totally subscribe and give this video a like and comment below to let us know what type of videos you would like to see us create in the future. And if you would really like to support all of us here at the 𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐺𝐺𝐵 channel, please consider purchasing a 𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐺𝐺𝐵 t-shirt or becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐺𝐵𝐻𝐺𝐵, where you can receive many rewards, such as getting shoutouts, having any topic or theory that you select discussed on the podcast or made into its own video, having your question answered, joining on as a guest on the podcast, and playing with us during our Twitch live streams at twitch.tv/𝐵𝐴𝐻𝐺𝐵, and much, much more.